Undercover black boss buys burger at his own diner, freezes when he hears two cashiers. The morning rain had stopped, but the clouds still hung heavy over downtown Atlanta as Jamal Rivers pulled his beat-up Honda into the parking lot of Rivers' Table. He sat for a moment, staring at the neon sign that had been his pride and joy for 15 years. The blue cursive letters spelling out his restaurant's name flickered slightly, something he made a mental note to fix later. At 47, Jamal had built something remarkable from nothing. What started as a dream in a cramped apartment kitchen had grown into a small chain of soul food diners across 3 states. Rivers' Table wasn't just a business. It was his legacy, his grandmother's recipes brought to life, his way of giving back to communities that looked like the one he grew up in. But success had pulled him away from the heart of it all. Board meetings, expansion plans, investor calls, he'd spent the last 2 years in boardrooms instead of dining rooms. Today, he was coming home. Pulling his hood up over his graying beard, Jamal checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. The old jeans, worn sneakers, and faded hoodie made him look like any other customer. Perfect. He'd done this before at his other locations, but something felt different about today. Maybe it was the phone call from his accountant yesterday, mentioning some irregularities in the payroll reports. Or maybe it was the nagging feeling that he'd lost touch with what made Rivers' Table special. The lunch rush was in full swing when he pushed through the glass doors. The familiar smell of fried chicken and cornbread should have made him smile, but instead, he frowned. Where was the energy? The warmth? The place felt cold. He remembered when this location buzzed with life. Customers lingered over their meals, staff members laughed with regulars, and there was always music playing, Motown, gospel, some old-school R&B. Now, the speakers were silent except for the occasional beep from the register. Jamal joined the line, keeping his head down. In front of him, an elderly woman shifted impatiently as the line moved slowly. Behind the counter, 2 young cashiers, both looked to be in their early 20s, moved with the enthusiasm of people who'd rather be anywhere else. The taller one, with bright purple braids, had Stacy written on her name tag. She barely looked up as she took orders, her fingers dancing across the register with practiced boredom. The other, Brittany, according to her tag, had her hair pulled back in a tight bun and kept glancing at her phone between customers. This wasn't the Rivers' Table he remembered. This wasn't the place where he taught his staff that every customer was family, where the motto, "Serving love, one plate at a time," meant something. Next, Stacy called out, not bothering to make eye contact with the elderly woman in front of Jamal. The woman ordered slowly, asking questions about the menu. Jamal watched as Stacy's patience wore thin, her responses becoming shorter and more curt with each question. When the woman finally finished ordering, she walked away looking confused and slightly hurt. Jamal's jaw tightened. This was exactly why he'd started doing these undercover visits. Numbers on a spreadsheet could tell you about profit margins and efficiency, but they couldn't tell you about the soul of your business. And right now, Rivers' Table was losing its soul. Next, Stacy called again, this time looking directly at Jamal. He stepped forward, pulling his hood down slightly but keeping his face partially hidden. "Let me get a classic burger, medium, with fries and a Coke. That'll be $12.47, she said, already turning away to grab a cup for his drink. As Jamal handed over the cash, he noticed Brittany whispering something to Stacy. Both girls glanced toward the kitchen, then back at each other, sharing a look that made Jamal's instincts prickle. There was something secretive about it, something that didn't belong in his restaurant. He found a table in the corner where he could observe without being noticed. The lunch crowd was steady but not overwhelming, maybe 30 customers scattered across the dining room. Most ate quietly, some scrolled through their phones, but nobody seemed particularly happy to be there. This wasn't right. Rivers' Table had always been about community, about bringing people together over good food and warm hospitality. What he was seeing now looked more like a fast food joint than the family restaurant he'd built. Jamal's burger arrived after 20 minutes, far too long for a simple order. The delivery was handled by a young man who looked nervous, constantly glancing back toward the counter where Stacy and Brittany had resumed their whispered conversation. As he waited, Jamal found himself studying every detail of his restaurant with fresh eyes. The walls still displayed the family photos and local artwork he'd carefully chosen, but they looked dusty, uncared for. The booth cushions were cracked in places he didn't remember. Even the plants by the window looked neglected. But it was the staff that troubled him most. Beyond Stacy and Brittany, he counted 3 other employees visible, 2 in the kitchen and 1 bussing tables. None of them seemed engaged, none of them seemed to care about the customers or each other. This wasn't the team he'd built. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, his operations manager. "How's the visit going? Everything looking good at the flagship?" Jamal stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. "We need to talk." The flagship location. That's what they called this place in the corporate office. The original Rivers table that had started it all. If this was what his flagship looked like, what did the other locations look like? He was about to take his first bite of the burger when Stacy's voice cut through his thoughts. She was talking to Brittany, but her voice carried just enough for him to hear. "Girl, I can't believe how easy that was," Stacy was saying, glancing around to make sure no customers were listening. "Another $50, just like that." Jamal's hand froze halfway to his mouth. $50? What were they talking about? Brittany giggled, leaning closer to her coworker. "That makes 6 this month. At this rate, we'll have enough for that trip to Miami by summer." "6 what?" Jamal set his burger down, straining to hear more without making it obvious he was listening. "I still can't believe they all fall for it," Stacy continued, her voice dropping lower. "All you have to do is sound official, tell them it's policy, and they hand over the cash, no questions asked." The blood in Jamal's veins started to run cold. Policy? What policy required new employees to hand over cash? "Remember that girl, Kiara?" Brittany said, and Jamal's world tilted on its axis. "She was so sweet, so trusting. Almost felt bad taking her money. Almost." Kiara. His niece Kiara. His sister's daughter, who'd applied for a summer job here 3 months ago. The same Kiara who'd come home after 2 days saying the job didn't work out, and had been unusually quiet about the whole experience. Jamal's hands began to shake, and his Coke slipped from his grip, the plastic cup hitting the floor with a hollow thud that seemed to echo throughout the restaurant. The sound of the falling cup made several customers look up, but Jamal barely noticed. His mind was racing, replaying every conversation he'd had with Kiara over the past 3 months. How quiet she'd been when she came back from her brief stint at Rivers' table. How she'd avoided his eyes when he asked about the job. How she'd simply said, "It wasn't a good fit," and changed the subject whenever he brought it up. Now he knew why. Stacy and Brittany had glanced over when the cup fell, but quickly returned to their conversation, apparently satisfied that it was just a clumsy customer. Jamal forced himself to remain still, every muscle in his body tense with barely contained rage. "The best part," Stacy continued, her voice still low but audible to Jamal's trained ears, "is that they never complained to management. They're too embarrassed, thinking they did something wrong." "Right," Brittany agreed, wiping down the counter with lazy strokes. "Like that new guy yesterday, what was his name? Deshaun? $50 for a uniform processing fee and he just handed it over. Didn't even ask for a receipt." Jamal's stomach churned. Deshaun was probably some kid trying to make an honest living, just like Kiara had been. Just like all the others these two had apparently been scamming. "And Marcus never checks the security footage from orientation days," Stacy added with a smirk. "As long as we angle the cameras away during the deposit talks, there's no proof of anything." Marcus. Jamal's operations manager, the man he trusted to oversee this location. Either Marcus was incompetent, or he was in on it. Right now, Jamal wasn't sure which possibility made him angrier. 6 newbies in 3 months, Brittany said, holding up her fingers to count. 50 each. That's $300 we've split. Not bad for extra income. Better than waiting tables. Stacy laughed. Remember when we used to actually work for our money? The casual cruelty in their voices made Jamal's vision blur with fury. These weren't just employees stealing from his business. They were predators targeting vulnerable people who needed work. Young people like his niece, who trusted River's Table because it was family. Jamal pulled out his phone with trembling fingers and scrolled to Marvin's number. Marvin Jackson had been his head of security for 8 years, a former police detective who'd helped Jamal implement safety protocols across all locations. If anyone could get to the bottom of this quietly, it was Marvin. The phone rang twice before Marvin's gravelly voice answered. Jamal? What's up, boss? Marvin, I need you to pull some records for me. Quietly. Jamal kept his voice low, turning slightly away from the counter. Employee logs for this location, going back 90 days. I want to see every new hire, every resignation, every termination. Sure thing. What am I looking for specifically? Jamal watched as another customer approached the counter, a young woman who looked nervous about her first day. She was carrying a folder that probably contained her hiring paperwork. His heart sank as he realized she might be walking into the same trap. Look for patterns in new hire departures. People who quit within their first week, especially. He paused, his voice getting harder. And I want you to check the security camera access logs. See who's been adjusting camera angles in the last 3 months. There was a pause on the other end. Marvin had worked with Jamal long enough to read between the lines. Boss, you want to tell me what's going on? Not over the phone. Just get me those records and meet me at the corporate office in 2 hours. And Marvin? Jamal's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Pull Kiara's employment file too. My niece. Another pause, longer this time. Copy that, boss. I'll have everything ready. Jamal hung up and forced himself to take a bite of his burger, though it tasted like cardboard in his mouth. He needed to appear normal, just another customer finishing his meal. But inside, his mind was working furiously. How many other young people had been scammed? How long had this been going on? And more importantly, how had his restaurant, his dream, become a place where employees could prey on newcomers without consequence? He thought about Kiara again, remembering how excited she'd been when he told her there might be a summer position available at River's Table. She'd lit up talking about working for the family business, about learning from the ground up like he had. The memory of her enthusiasm made his chest tight with guilt. She trusted him, trusted his business, and instead of the supportive work environment he'd promised, she'd been victimized by people who wore his company's name tag. As he sat there, forcing himself to eat while listening to Stacy and Brittany's casual conversation about their next victim, Jamal made a silent promise. This ended now. Not just the scam, but the culture that had allowed it to flourish. River's Table was going back to its roots, but first, he had some serious house cleaning to do. 2 hours later, Jamal sat across from Marvin in his corporate office, staring at a stack of personnel files that painted a damning picture. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, but the atmosphere in the room was dark with revelation. 6 new hires in the last 90 days, Marvin said, his weathered face grim as he flipped through the documents. All of them marked as voluntary resignation within their first week. No exit interviews, no documentation of problems, nothing. Jamal's jaw tightened as he reviewed each file. Deshaun Williams, 19, quit after 2 days. Maria Santos, 22, lasted 3 days. Jerome Patterson, 20, gone after 1 shift. And there, near the bottom of the stack, was Kiara's file. Kiara Rivers, Marvin read aloud, his voice careful. Hired June 15th, terminated June 17th. Reason listed as decided position wasn't suitable. No further documentation. 2 days. His bright, ambitious niece had lasted 2 days before whatever happened drove her away. Jamal's hands clenched into fists on the desk. What about the security footage? He asked, his voice deadly quiet. Marvin pulled out another folder, this one filled with technical reports and timestamps. This is where it gets interesting. Every single orientation day for the past 3 months, The camera system shows manual adjustments during specific time periods. Always between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m., always on days when new employees were scheduled for their first shift. Manual adjustments, Jamal repeated. Who has access to manually adjust the cameras? Shift supervisors and above. But here's the thing, the adjustments weren't logged by Marcus or any of the other managers. Someone's been accessing the system without proper authorization. Jamal leaned back in his chair, the pieces falling into place. They figured out how to disable the cameras during their uniform fee conversations. Smart enough to cover their tracks, but not smart enough to realize we keep access logs. There's more, Marvin continued, pulling out a final set of papers. I did some digging into the payment records. None of these uniform fees show up anywhere in our accounting. No deposits, no petty cash records, nothing. This money is going straight into their pockets. The methodical nature of the theft made Jamal's blood boil even more. This wasn't opportunistic crime. It was calculated, repeated fraud targeting the most vulnerable people who walked through his doors. I want you to set up a sting operation, Jamal said, his decision crystallizing as he spoke. Tomorrow. Marvin raised an eyebrow. What did you have in mind? I want you to find someone who can pose as a nervous new hire. Young, maybe a little naive looking. Wire them up, give them marked bills, and let Stacy and Brittany try their usual routine. And if they don't take the bait? Jamal's smile was cold. They will. I watched them today, Marvin. This is their system, their regular income stream. They won't be able to resist an easy mark. Marvin nodded slowly. I know a guy who might work. My nephew Tyler, he's 20, just finished community college, could definitely pass for someone desperate for work. He's done some undercover work for me before, nothing this complex, but he can handle it. Perfect. Brief him tonight. I want him wired for sound and video. And I want backup cameras positioned where they can't be manually adjusted. Jamal's voice hardened. This time, we get everything on record. As Marvin gathered the files, Jamal found himself staring at Kiara's employment record again. Such a short file for someone who'd been so excited about the opportunity. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to her number, then hesitated. What could he say? Hey, I just found out you were scammed at my restaurant 3 months ago, and you never told me? The conversation would have to wait until he had the full picture. Boss, Marvin said, pausing at the door. What about Marcus? If he's been ignoring the camera irregularities, he's either incompetent or complicit. One thing at a time. Jamal replied, though privately he was already planning Marcus's future with the company. Let's catch the thieves first, then we'll deal with the management failures that enabled them. After Marvin left, Jamal sat alone in his office as the sun set over Atlanta. The city lights began to twinkle beyond his windows, but all he could think about was the betrayal happening under his own roof. River's table had been built on trust, trust between him and his customers, trust between him and his employees, trust between his business and the community. Stacy and Brittany hadn't just stolen money, they'd stolen the foundation of everything he'd worked to build. Tomorrow, he would begin taking it back. The next morning, Jamal sat in Marvin's unmarked van across the street from River's table, watching a live feed from multiple hidden cameras. His hands gripped a cold cup of coffee as he observed Tyler Jackson walk nervously toward the restaurant entrance. Tyler looked perfect for the role, young, eager, and just uncertain enough to seem like an easy target. He wore a cheap button-down shirt that was slightly too big for him and carried a manila folder containing fake references and employment documents that Marvin had carefully prepared. Audio check, Marvin whispered into his headset. Tyler's voice came through clearly. Yeah, I can hear you fine. I'm about to go in. Remember, Jamal said into his own mic. Act nervous but not suspicious. You're just a kid who needs a job and doesn't know any better. Through the restaurant's windows, they could see Stacy and Brittany at their usual positions behind the counter. It was 2:30 p.m., right in the middle of their preferred time window for orientation scams. Tyler pushed through the glass doors, and Jamal watched him approach the counter with practiced hesitation. The hidden cameras, professionally installed by Marvin's team before the restaurant opened, captured every angle that the original security system couldn't cover. "Excuse me," Tyler said, his voice carrying perfectly through the wire. "I'm Tyler Jackson. I'm supposed to start today? I got a call yesterday saying I should come in for orientation." Stacy looked up with the same bored expression Jamal remembered from the day before, but something shifted in her eyes when she saw Tyler's nervous demeanor. It was like watching a predator recognize prey. "Oh right, Tyler," she said, suddenly more animated. "Yeah, we've been expecting you. Let me get Brittany to help with your paperwork." Brittany appeared from the back office, carrying a clipboard and wearing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome to River's table, Tyler. First job?" "Yes, ma'am," Tyler replied, his voice cracking slightly. "I mean, first real job. I'm really excited to be here." Jamal had to admire the kid's acting skills. The nervousness seemed completely genuine. "That's great," Brittany said, leading Tyler to a table near the window. "Let's get your paperwork sorted out, and then we'll get you set up with everything you need." For the next 20 minutes, Jamal watched as Brittany went through what appeared to be legitimate orientation procedures. She explained work schedules, break policies, and dress code requirements. Tyler nodded along, asking appropriate questions and filling out forms. Then came the moment they'd been waiting for. "Okay, last thing," Brittany said, glancing around to make sure no customers were within earshot. "There's just one small fee we need to collect before you start. It's for your uniform and name tag processing." Tyler looked confused, exactly as coached. "A fee? Nobody mentioned that when I was hired." "Oh, it's standard," Stacy chimed in, walking over from the counter. "All new employees have to pay it. It's company policy, just not something we advertise, you know?" Jamal's blood pressure spiked as he watched them execute the exact same routine they'd likely used on Kiara and all the others. "How much is it?" Tyler asked, reaching for his wallet with convincing reluctance. $50, Brittany said smoothly. "Cash only. We'll get you your shirt and name tag by tomorrow, but we need the payment today to process the order." "I don't know," Tyler said, hesitating perfectly. "That seems like a lot." "Look, kid," Stacy said, her voice taking on a slightly harder edge. "This is how it works here. You want the job or not? Because we've got other people who applied." The threat was clear, and Jamal watched Tyler's shoulders slump in defeat, a reaction that was probably all too real for the victims who'd come before. "Okay," Tyler said quietly, pulling out an envelope. "I have the money." Jamal leaned forward, every muscle tense. The envelope contained $50 in marked bills, each serial number photographed and recorded. More importantly, it contained a small tracking device that would allow them to prove the money had been taken. Brittany took the envelope with practiced casualness. "Thanks, Tyler. Like I said, you'll get your uniform tomorrow. Just remember, this transaction is off the books, okay? For tax purposes." "Off the books," Tyler repeated, his confusion sounding genuine. "Right. And you don't need to mention it to any of the managers. They don't handle the uniform processing, that's our department." Stacy's smile was predatory now. "Welcome to River's table." In the van, Jamal's hands were shaking with rage. "That's it," he said into his mic. "We've got them." But the trap wasn't finished yet. As Tyler began to leave, Brittany called after him. "Oh, and Tyler? The security cameras don't record during orientation sessions. Privacy policy. So if anyone asks, you just filled out paperwork today, okay?" The casual mention of the cameras was the final nail in their coffin. Jamal smiled grimly as he watched Tyler nod and walk out of the restaurant, the envelope of marked money now in Brittany's pocket. "Phase 1 complete," Marvin said, beginning to pack up the surveillance equipment. "When do we move to Phase 2? Jamal checked his watch. "Tonight. Time for a staff meeting." At 8 p.m., River's table was closed to customers but buzzing with activity. Jamal stood in the parking lot, watching through the windows as the evening staff gathered in the main dining area. Marcus had called the meeting, telling everyone it was about new corporate policies and potential changes. What the staff didn't know was that Marcus himself was in the dark about the real purpose of tonight's gathering. Jamal took a deep breath and walked toward the entrance, his heart pounding with anticipation and fury. Behind him, Marvin followed with a laptop bag containing all the evidence they'd gathered. In the back seat of Jamal's car, Kiara sat quietly, still unsure why her uncle had asked her to come tonight. The dining room fell silent as Jamal entered, still wearing casual clothes, jeans and a plain black t-shirt that made him look more like a consultant than the owner. Marcus stepped forward with a nervous smile. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Mr. Johnson," Marcus announced to the assembled staff of 12. "He's a potential investor who's been evaluating our operations. He wanted to meet the team and discuss some observations." Jamal nodded politely, scanning the faces in front of him. Stacy and Brittany stood near the back, looking mildly curious but not particularly concerned. They had no reason to suspect that Mr. Johnson had been watching them for 2 days. "Thank you, Marcus," Jamal said, his voice calm and professional. "I appreciate everyone staying late tonight. I know your time is valuable." He walked to the center of the room, noting how some staff members seemed engaged while others, particularly Stacy and Brittany, looked like they were just waiting for this to be over. "I've been observing this location for the past few days," Jamal continued, "and I've learned some very interesting things about how this restaurant operates." Marvin moved to the side wall and began setting up a portable projector screen. The staff watched with mild interest, probably expecting some boring presentation about efficiency metrics. "Before we begin," Jamal said, pulling out his phone, "I'd like someone special to join us." He stepped toward the front door and gestured. Kiara entered hesitantly, her eyes immediately finding her uncle's face. She looked confused and slightly scared, clearly not understanding why she was here. "This is Kiara," Jamal announced. "Some of you might remember her. She worked here briefly a few months ago." He watched Stacy and Brittany's faces carefully. Stacy's expression didn't change, but Brittany shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between Kiara and the floor. "Kiara lasted exactly 2 days before she quit," Jamal continued. "She told her family that the job wasn't a good fit. But that wasn't really the truth, was it?" The room was getting uncomfortable now. Marcus looked confused, clearly not understanding where this was going. Several staff members glanced at each other uncertainly. "The truth," Jamal said, his voice getting harder, "is that Kiara was scammed out of $50 by employees who told her it was a uniform processing fee." The words hit the room like a bomb. Gasps echoed from several staff members, while others looked shocked and confused. But Jamal's eyes were locked on Stacy and Brittany, both of whom had gone pale. "That's ridiculous," Stacy said quickly, her voice higher than usual. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" Jamal reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, the same envelope Tyler had handed over earlier that day. "Then maybe you can explain how this envelope, containing $50 in marked bills, ended up in your locker?" Brittany took a step backward, her eyes wide. Let me show everyone what really happened," Jamal said, nodding to Marvin, who started the projector. The screen lit up with crystal clear footage from that afternoon. The hidden cameras had captured everything, Brittany collecting the uniform fee from Tyler, Stacy's casual mention of keeping it off the books, and their satisfied smiles as they pocketed the money. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Marcus stepped forward, his face a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "What is this? Jamal, how did you?" And that's when Jamal pulled off his hat and turned to face the room fully for the first time. The silence was deafening. "My name isn't Johnson," he said quietly. "I'm Jamal Rivers. I own this restaurant. I own all of Rivers' Table." The recognition hit the room in waves. Some staff members looked shocked but relieved. They'd done nothing wrong and were as horrified as anyone about the scam. Others, particularly Marcus, looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. But Stacy and Brittany looked like they'd seen a ghost. For the past 3 months, Jamal continued, his voice carrying the weight of betrayal and disappointment. These 2 employees have been stealing from new hires. They've taken money from at least 6 people, including my own niece. He walked over to Kiara, putting a gentle hand on her shoulder. She was staring at Stacy and Brittany with a mixture of hurt and anger. The question I have, Jamal said, his eyes sweeping the room, is how this was allowed to happen in a restaurant that's supposed to be about family, about trust, about taking care of our community. His gaze settled on Marcus, who was sweating profusely. And why the person I trusted to manage this location never noticed that new employees were quitting after 2 days, or that security cameras were being manually adjusted during orientation sessions. The silence stretched on, heavy with implications and unspoken consequences. Finally, Jamal spoke again. We're going to make this right, he said simply. All of it. The silence that followed was broken by Stacy's desperate voice. Mr. Rivers, we can explain. No, Jamal cut her off, his voice firm but not shouting. The time for explanations ended when you decided to steal from people who trusted this business. The time for explanations ended when you made my niece feel ashamed for something that wasn't her fault. He turned to address the entire room. Stacy Williams and Brittany Chin, you're terminated immediately. Security will escort you out after we finish here. You'll also be hearing from our legal department and local law enforcement about charges for theft and fraud. Both women started to protest, but Marvin stepped forward, his presence making it clear that arguments wouldn't be tolerated. Marcus, Jamal continued, turning to his operations manager, your employment is also terminated. Whether you knew about this scheme or simply failed to notice it, either way represents a fundamental failure in your duties to protect both this business and our employees. Marcus opened his mouth as if to argue, then seemed to think better of it. His shoulders sagged in defeat. For everyone else, Jamal said, his voice softening slightly, I want you to know that what happened here is not your fault. But it is a reflection of what this restaurant had become, and that stops today. He gestured to Marvin, who handed him a folder of documents. Effective immediately, we're implementing what I'm calling the Kiara Clause in all Rivers Table locations, Jamal announced, pulling out several printed pages. No employee ever will be required to pay any fee to start work. Not for uniforms, not for name tags, not for training materials, nothing. Any request for money from a new hire will result in immediate termination and criminal charges. He looked around the room, making eye contact with each remaining staff member. Furthermore, all new employee orientations will be conducted by management only, with HR oversight, and will be fully documented and recorded. No exceptions. Jamal walked over to Kiara, who had been standing quietly throughout the confrontation. Her eyes were red, but she was holding her head high. Kiara, I owe you an apology, he said, his voice gentle. You should have been able to trust this place, and we failed you. You should have felt safe telling me what happened, and somehow we created an environment where you felt you couldn't. Kiara's composure finally cracked, and tears began to flow. Uncle Jamal, I was so embarrassed. They made it sound like it was normal, like everyone had to pay it. And when I realized something was wrong, I thought maybe I wasn't smart enough for the job. Jamal pulled his niece into a hug, his own eyes wet. You are brilliant, and you are strong, and what happened to you was a crime. It was never about you not being good enough. He stepped back, still holding her shoulders. Which is why I want to offer you a position at our corporate office. Paid internship in our new employee protection department. Help us make sure this never happens to anyone else. Kiara's eyes widened in surprise. Really? Really? If you're interested. She nodded enthusiastically, wiping away her tears. Yes. Absolutely yes. Jamal turned back to the remaining staff. I know tonight has been difficult. Change always is. But I want you to understand something important. Rivers Table was built on the idea that food brings people together, that work should be dignifying, and that we take care of each other. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. He walked to the wall where the restaurant's original mission statement hung in a frame, now dusty and overlooked. "Serving love, one plate at a time," he read aloud. "That's not just about the food we serve. It's about how we treat each other, how we treat our customers, and how we build something bigger than just a business." The room was quiet, but the atmosphere had shifted. The tension was being replaced by something that felt like hope. "Starting tomorrow, we're going back to basics," Jamal continued. "I'll be here every day for the next month, working alongside you, learning what we need to fix and what we need to build. We're going to retrain everyone, not just on procedures, but on what it means to be part of the Rivers Table family." He paused, looking around the room one more time. "And if any of you ever see something wrong, something that doesn't feel right, I want you to know that you can come to me directly. My door is always open." As Marvin escorted Stacy, Brittany, and Marcus out of the restaurant, Jamal found himself standing with the remaining staff and Kiara in the dining room that had seen so much pain over the past few months. But for the first time in years, it felt like Rivers Table again. 3 months later, the restaurant was humming with life. New staff had been carefully hired and properly trained. The walls had been repainted, the plants were thriving, and music once again filled the dining room. Most importantly, Kiara had thrived in her new role, helping to implement employee protection protocols across all locations. Her first initiative had been an anonymous reporting system that gave every employee a safe way to raise concerns. Standing in his original restaurant, watching customers laugh over meals and staff members who genuinely cared about their work, Jamal smiled. Rivers Table had found its heart again. And this time, he was going to make sure it never lost it.